I thought I had already signed up.
Did you? All right. All right. Good. Christian, it's yours then. Okay.
I mean,
good. I forgot.
yeah.
Yes, you had. All right. Good. We're good to go. All right.
I'm behind of where I wanted to be, but yeah, I thought it was me.
That's good. All right. So, it's completely up to you guys how you want to handle the material. If you want people to submit questions and answers, if you want them to not, however you want to do it. You want to give assignments, you don't want to give us whatever you want to do. It's completely up to you.
So,
right?
Jeff, will you stay on for a couple minutes after?
Yes, we're going to talk afterwards.
Okay.
We will. Yeah. Okay. All right. So where we left off at the end of Judges was that, the Israelites came into the promised land around 1200 BC and started appointing judges. And for the most part, it didn't work out real well. The judges were mostly regional. They were raised up to deal with specific issues, raised up by God. But at the end of I'm getting an echo. At the end of Judges, Israel was not in a good place. Things were in pretty bad shape. It was in disarray. The Philistines were still on the coast, very strong, making forays into the inland, taking land back. The Jebusites were still in Jerusalem. Nobody had managed to push them out yet. Phoenicians were still up on the northern coast. Nobody had pushed them out. There were pockets of Canaanites still living all over the promised land. And essentially the Israelites have said, let them alone. Better than that, let's go marry their women and worship their gods. And, let's just kind of commingle everything. So things were not going so well. The tribe of Dan ended up realizing that they weren't going to get the help of the rest of Israel to push out the Philistines. So they gave up. They said, that's it, we're done. We're leaving. And they moved 200 miles north. The tribe of Benjamin pissed everybody off. All 11 other tribes attacked them, essentially wiped them out, except for 600 men, that they then kidnapped 600 women to be their wives. And now, not only is there fighting between the tribes of Israel and the Canaanites, there's now fighting among the tribes of Israel. And that's where we left it at the end of the book of Judges. So now we come into 1 Samuel. And we start off by learning about Elkanah's family. It's roughly 1050 to 1080 BC, something like that. We are in the tribe of Ephraim, which is right in the middle of the country, just above that horizontal line that you can draw from the Jordan River where they crossed all the way over to the Mediterranean, just above Ephraim. And we hear about Elkanah. Ephraim is where all the shrines of the Israelites are. And it is just north of what's left of the southern tribes, Judah, what's left of Benjamin, and a little bit of Syrian. Everybody else is north of Elkanah. Ephraim. And Elkanah has two wives, Peninnah and Hannah. And Hannah is where we focus. So Sue, why don't you tell us about Hannah?
Okay. So I took a study from Bishop Robert Barron a couple of years ago, and I recall him saying that Hannah was one of the most pivotal figures in the history of salvation. That's why I wanted to take this question. So clearly there's a lot to unpack about Hannah, but I'm going to focus on two of what I think are the major themes. The first is we see yet again, God chooses what appears to be the lowliest, least likely to do his work. Hannah is married, but she is childless, and that is about as low as it gets on the social status for a woman as you can get. So she's not a likely hero in here, but throughout her life, she remains prayerful and persistent and obedient. She even remains patient and offers no ill will toward her tormentor, who is, how did you pronounce her name?
Peninnah.
Peninnah. So one year she goes to the temple, she cries out to the Lord, has great faith in the Lord. She's mistaken for a drunkard by Eli, the high priest, which I found even more evidence of God being with her, because she did not get angry. She responded with dignity. She said, no, no, I'm not a drunkard. I'm crying out to the Lord to relieve my state. Eli finally gets it. He intercedes for her. She becomes pregnant, and she gives birth to Samuel. When she cried out to the Lord, she made a pact with him, said, my firstborn son, I will consecrate to you for your work for all of his life. After she gives birth, she keeps her promise and returns to Samuel, returns to the temple, or returns back to Eli, gives Samuel over to Eli, and she then voices what has been called one of the most beautiful prayers and hymns of the Bible. And it's been said that this prayer hymn, that Mary's Magnificat, was actually modeled after her prayer, which brings me to my second theme, and that is the parallel between Hannah and Mary. The first was the prayers that I just told you about. The second parallel is the pattern in which they both led their lives. And in my research, I read where Pope John Paul II called this pattern the law of the gift, which states that your being increases in the measure you give it away. Or another way to say that is, give back to God what he has given you, and you will see it multiplied. So both Hannah and Mary were obviously very selfish, selfless in answering God's call for their lives, and especially in the way that they raised their sons and then consecrated them back to God. So based on that, I would say that Bishop Barron was pretty spot on when he said that Hannah played a pivotal role. Had it not been for Hannah's faithfulness, by giving Samuel back to the Lord, Samuel would not have become a great prophet. And had he not been a prophet, we know what's coming next. He would not have been able to anoint David. And had Mary not consecrated Jesus back to God, we wouldn't have our Savior. So I found Hannah to be, very fascinating.
Perfect. Beautiful. And the only thing I would add to that is that there are some parallels between Hannah and some other women in the Bible too. Sarah, yes, and Rebecca and Samson's mother, who were all childless. Yes. And as the result of a miraculous intervention, gave birth to spectacular people. Sometimes spectacular great, sometimes spectacular not so great, but certainly spectacular. Nice job, Steve. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting how Chris's opening prayer tied into what you said about Hannah is giving back to God. You know.
Yep. Exactly. Perfect. All right. So here we have Hannah. She has pleaded with Eli to intercede on her behalf, and he has. And now we run into this Eli character, the high priest, the Levite. And he has a little bit of a revelation himself. And he's told, your sons are out of control. They're SOBs. They're extracting bribes from people at the temple. They're, taking the sacrifices for themselves. They're bad guys, and God's tired of it. And you, Eli, aren't able or aren't willing to straighten them out. So bad things are going to happen to you. And the man of God tells Eli that God will honor those who honor him, but those who despise him will be cursed. And that is essentially the theme of everything going forward now. God is changing the plan. So he has told Eli, a Levite, that in the past, I said that I would honor your father's house, meaning Levi's house, the house of the Levitical house, and that you should minister in my presence forever. But now I'm changing the deal because you have failed to live up to your end of the bargain. And jumping ahead a bit, we're going to see that Eli and his sons are the last two Levitical priests in Shiloh. Samuel is chosen by God. Yeah, go ahead, Mark. You're on mute.
So that was not a covenant agreement that God had with the house of Levi?
No, that's a great question. We had this in the earlier session too. A covenant shouldn't be thought of as an agreement. This was an agreement. Okay, agreements can be broken. If one side doesn't hold up their end of the bargain, the agreement can be broken. We tend to always talk about covenants like contracts. Mm-hmm. That's theologically misdirected. A covenant is more like a relationship than it is an agreement. And it's like the relationship that Joe and Sue have. It's like the relationship that each of you has with your wife. It is a bond made by oath. So it is as unbreakable as the relationship that you have with your mother, your father, or your children. So sometimes a covenant is described as a kinship by oath. Kinship, the relationship of being kin, of being family, is unbreakable. That's why the Catholic Church doesn't recognize divorce. Because if a marital covenant is valid, if it's properly made in the first place, it can't be broken. So the relationship between God and the chosen people is a covenantal relationship. It can't be broken. Even if the Israelites screw it up, God will still honor it. He made an agreement with the Levites, though, that you will be the priestly class, but you have to do all of this. Well, guess what? As we've seen in Judges, the Levites are like all over the place. They're selling their spiritual services for money. They're, roaming priests for hire. And Eli's sons, Levites, are out of control. So we see that Eli's fate has been cast.
So Jeff, can I ask a question, Jeff? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
I was just wondering, you mentioned there are no more Levite priests in Shiloh. Is it only in Shiloh where there are no more Levites?
Yes. And I don't really want to get into that yet because we're going to see more happen with that as we move along.
Okay.
All right. Go ahead, Joe.
No, you answered my question, or this sort of the same question, because when I get into what you asked me to talk about, I'll mention it.
Yeah. We're going to get there in just a second, Joe. So Samuel's chosen by God himself in a kind of a cute little give and take dialogue. Samuel, yeah, here I am, Eli. What do you want? No, I didn't call you Samuel 3 times. And finally, Eli, in spite of the fact that he knows God doesn't favor him, he still is doing his Levitical duty. His sons are. And he's not reining them in, but he's still doing his duty. And he says, next time, just listen and do whatever God tells you. And so Samuel gets the revelation from God and goes to Eli. And Eli is described as not allowing the lamp of God to be extinguished. Well, that goes back to Exodus, where the Levites are instructed to never let the lamp, the sanctuary lamp in the temple, go out. That sound like anything familiar? Catholic? Okay. That's where we get that. Okay. So he is keeping the sanctuary lamp lit, and Samuel comes to him and says, "You're not going to like this." And Eli says, "Doesn't matter. Tell me. Whatever it is, tell me." And he said, "Well, God says, man, you're all dead." He's pissed at you. And Eli's response is, God's will be done, basically. So Eli is a kind of a conflicted character. He's not a good man. He's not a good Levite, but he's a Levite that's doing his duty, at least in respect to the temple duties. He's not doing his duty as a father. So we get to the point now where, hang on a second. We see that Samuel is a very special guy. We hear that at this point, 150 years after Joshua, God isn't talking to people face to face anymore. But here he comes along and talks to Samuel face to face. And then we are told that Samuel, very quickly, all of a sudden, Samuel is the dude. He's the guy. People from Dan all the way up north to Beersheba, all the way down south, recognize Samuel is the prophet. He's the guy. And that doesn't mean that Hophni and Phinehas aren't still around, and Eli too. They are. But they're losing credibility at this point. Now it says that Samuel is a prophet, not a priest. He's not a Levite. He's from the tribe of Ephraim. Okay, keep that in mind. But he's functioning at all the shrines in Ephraim, Shiloh, Gilead, Mitzpah, as a prophet, okay? Talking to God face to face. That's what we hear at the end of chapter 3. And then all of a sudden, Samuel goes away, Eli goes away, and we hear about this fight with the Philistines. There's no Eli involved in this chapter, these chapters. There's no Samuel involved in these chapters. That's because there's no God involved in these chapters. The sons of Eli go with the Israelite army to fight the Philistines. And they say, hey, wait a minute, there's this magical little thing up there at Shiloh. Let's go grab it and take it with us, the Ark of the Covenant. You know, we hear that there's stories about it doing good things. But they're not worshiping God. They're not honoring God. They're, you know, participating in all of the Canaanite bad stuff at this point. And Phinehas and Hophni are just jackasses. So God is not going to honor them because as God has said in chapter 2, I will honor those who honor me, but those who despise me shall be cursed. And they get cursed in the battle. They lose the battle. They take the Ark of the Covenant into the camp, and the Canaanites, the Philistines, hear them cheering and says, woe to us, God is there. He's with them. Again, Canaanites know who the real God is. They're afraid of this God. But they go into battle, and the Israelites are blown out, badly defeated. And so what happens, Jerry?
Well, at that point, they send for the ark, and it comes to the battlefield, and as you said, the big shout goes out, and what they're doing is basically treating the ark as a charm, a lucky charm, basically. No God involved again, just the symbol, this thing that they, again, this lucky charm is going to win it for them. And they go into battle again with that. They lose dramatically, even worse than the first time. The two sons are killed, and fulfilling part of the prophecy. And the Philistines basically take over. They take the ark and keep it for a while. There's more story there. One of the Israelites runs back to Eli and the town and bypasses Eli to begin with, basically reflecting his the lack of respect for him at that point, I think. He tells all the townspeople that they've been defeated, and then finally goes and tells Eli, and he falls off his chair, breaks his neck, and fulfills the rest of the prophecy. So.
Yep. So, you know, Eli dies because he hears that as it is reported to him, first of all, that Hophni and Phinehas have died. And then it's reported to him that the Ark of the Covenant has been lost, and he gets upset about the loss of the Ark of the Covenant. So it says that he's In some translations of the Bible, it says that he was old and fat and fell off his chair and broke his neck. So that gives you some insight into Eli. He's more concerned about the loss of the Ark of the Covenant than he is about the death of his two sons. So what do
That's
we
a good thing, isn't it?
Pardon me? Yes.
That's a good part of him.
Yes, exactly. So he's kind of a conflicted character. So, Joe, what do we learn from Phineas and Hophni?
Well, we learned how not to be priests. How's that? So Phineas and Hophni are Eli's sons, right? And one of the things that in the research about this starts with Eli. I read in a commentary, Jeff, that he was a descendant of Eli, was a descendant of Aaron through Ithamar, okay? Which means Eli was not among the sons of the other Phineas, whose descendants God promised perpetual priesthood.
That's correct.
So
okay.
It's significant in the sense that he did fall out of favor, but we shouldn't be surprised that he did, right? That's how I looked at it. Now, as far as his sons are concerned, it's pretty blatant, and I don't know what chapter this is, but we're actually told in, I think it's chapter 2, that Phineas and Hophni are worthless men. They had no regard for the Lord. Okay, it actually says that. Okay, and so there are basically 3 offenses that Phineas and Hophni made against God and His people. Okay, the first was they stole from the people's food. Okay, and this was, I never thought I'd even learn about offerings. Okay, but let me give you some background. Only priests were allowed to eat the offerings. I had no clue, except for a peace offering. Okay, so in the peace offering, which we're talked about in I think it's chapter 2, they're offering up a lamb, and if you think about it, a lamb's about 100 pounds. Half the lamb is edible, and in a peace offering, the breast and the right thigh were always reserved for the priests. So they ate about 17 to 20% of the meal, and the people got the rest. Well, what Phineas and Hophni did is they went and they brought their big old fork and they dipped their fork in the offering and they took it out and they ate it themselves. They ate the whole dang thing themselves. So they had, so this is sort of a twofold sin, right? It's a sin against God because it was an abuse of the offerings, and they stole from people. So that's the second part of that sin. Okay. The other one I found really interesting, and never in my wildest dreams would I ever thought I'd get this far into it. Okay, was these 2 guys actually demanded raw meat before the sacrifice. Okay, so this is a triple offense. I'm told. They got the meat before the fat was burned, and this is a direct violation of peace offerings, which stipulates that the kidneys, the lobe of the liver, and the fat all be boiled or burned. Okay, that's the first sin. So they shouldn't be getting fat before it was burned. They wanted to roast the fat for more taste. Okay, and this was a violation of the prohibition of eating animal fat after the golden calf. And now you all remember the golden calf from Exodus. Was it Exodus?
Yes.
Don't I sound like Jeff? I'm getting in my next week. Get my Jeff on, right? So that was so the third problem with that, to make this a triple offense, was that they scandalized and stole from the people who came to worship the Lord. So they're really, really scandaled. Now, to beat all others, they went and they lay with the women who were at the entrance of the tent. So despite the abuses of stealing food and going against the offerings, they were committing fornication or adultery at the best, or rape at the worst, right? So these guys are really an example of how not to be a priest. Well, I'll go a little bit into Eli. I don't know if this impedes on anybody else's, but Eli refused to really deal with it, right? And he said, well, yeah, they're bad. They shouldn't be doing it. He even questions it in the reading, in which I thought was, okay, he's going to question it and do something about it, but he questions it and really just sort of wimps out on it and basically doesn't do anything about it. Well, Phineas and Hophni die in the battle with the Philistines. You know, the ark, which was just told, and the commentary that I read didn't give Eli as much credit as Jeff did. They basically painted Eli out as a bad guy, a bad judge, and there was one line in the commentary that says, "There's no throwaway lines in the Bible. The fact that he was big, old, and fat, and he fell off his chair and broke his neck, was the fact that he was just big, fat, and a sloth, and eating and stealing other people's foods." So this whole story of how not to be a priest is sort of encapsulated in all three of them. But I found it fascinating that just these little two-line references to these sons gave me this much material to even talk about, right? So anyway, that's what
That's what Bible study is all about.
Yeah.
Excellent job, Joe. When you submitted your question, I thought this is going to be a 5-word answer, but it could be more. Well, you did a great job with it.
Thanks.
Thank you. So, not only does Eli die when the news of Phineas and Hophni comes, standing next to him is his daughter-in-law, one of his son's wives. And what happens there, Mark?
Well, the daughter-in-law, whose name we never get, has a baby. She goes into labor because of all this stress and craziness. And she's so distraught that she gives him the name Ichabod, which is a very negative name. The translation, Ichabod means glory, but when you stick the I in front of it, it either means gone is the glory, or there is no glory, or alas, the glory. So she's kind of saddled her son with this very negative name. And then, of course, she dies from complications of childbirth. So the poor guy is an orphan. So I looked at it at first and said, boy, she gave her this only son this really negative name. He doesn't have any parents. He doesn't have a grandparent. In that society, he's got nothing, and he's got a name that proves there's nothing. But there was one comment that said, well, it was interesting because this mother actually must have had a bit of piety, because she realized how messed up things were. She didn't say, this is the only kid, I'm going to name him Jeff. I'm going to name him something glorious, but she gave him a very lamenting name. And I picked out Ichabod because every time you see these names that pop out of nowhere, there's always a story there.
Yep.
In this case, there wasn't much story, but he does show up in Joe and Sue's week next week, mentioned as the cousin of Ahitub. And he's mentioned in a very positive way. So the only thing I can say is you've got this guy who's got no parents or grandparents. He must have at least one sibling, somebody that's his cousin. But he takes this negative standing, and later on in the Bible has become known as a good person. So he didn't live with the shame that he was experiencing, but he took that shame, evidently, and made something good of it. So as Jeff said, you learn your lessons, and you go from there. So, he could have really said, I'm wrong, I'm bad, I'm worthless. But instead, he said, I did wrong, which is what he believed because he was born into such bad situation, but I can overcome it. So I think as much as he's got a sad story, there's a happy tale behind the sad story.
Very good. Now, just as an aside, the name Ichabod, without glory, I means without. Anybody familiar with the name, the word Shabbat? Ring a bell?
Shabbat.
It's local.
Temple?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Think back in the news.
Oh, yeah.
Not long ago.
The shootings. The shootings. That's right.
The Shabbat synagogue is one of those that was housed in the building with the shooting of all the Jews. That was, so just as an interesting aside, that word is based on the name Shabbat, Ichabod. It's the O and the A and the last part of the name are different because in Hebrew there are no vowels. So the O, A, E, they all get moved around all the time. It's Shabbat. So interesting anyway. Okay, so they lose the ark. Lou, could you pull up the first map? And the Canaanites take the ark. And at the end of chapter 5, we hear that the ark has made its way from Shiloh to the battle at Ebenezer, where it is lost. And they take the ark back to Aphek. And all kinds of bad things happen there. They put it in front of the statue of Dagon, their Baal, their god, and it kind of takes out the statue. And they say, get the thing the hell out of here. So they take it down to the next Philistine city, down to Ashdod. And bad things happen there. People start getting sick and getting what they call tumors, boils, nasty growths. So they say, get this thing out of here. So they take it down to Gath. And they are overrun with rats, mice, and they start getting sick. Okay, now think about this for a minute. Now go back to the other map, Lou. So think about this for a minute. People are getting sick. There's rats, mice, boils. What does this sound like to you?
The plagues of Egypt.
Legs.
It's the plague. It's the bubonic plague. Same thing that God did to the Egyptians. So God is, he's active here. He's in the ark. And he's saying, I don't belong to you. So he's punishing these people. So they take it up to Ekron, and the Ekronites say, get it the heck out of here. We got to figure out a way to get rid of this thing if it's really bad. This is the God of the Israelites. Well, we think it is. Let's do a check here. Let's do a little divination. So they put the ark in a wagon, and they put 2 cows that are like unblemished, and they smack cows on the rump and say, take off. And they say, if the cows head for Beth Shemesh, that means it's the God of the Israelites. If they go the other direction, it's just a coincidence that we're all getting sick, so we'll take the ark back and melt it down and get some money out of this thing. Well, there's a reason why Beth Shemesh is important. It's right on the border of Philistia, Judah, and Benjamin. And it is you may recall this, probably not, from way, way back when, it's one of the Levitical cities. It's one of the Levitical cities where Phinehas's family is prevailing. So it heads to Beth Shemesh, and the Philistines say, okay, it's going on the Lord's way. Chapter 6, verse 9. The Philistines say, it's going the Lord, the way of El, the way of Yahweh, of God. They know it's God, yet they won't convert. He's still giving them chances. If he went the other way, it would have been a coincidence, but he went that way. So the Levites in Beth Shemesh receive the ark. They celebrate, great time, but there's one family that doesn't participate in the partying. And so, if I was still in college, I would love this because the lesson I would take from this is party or die. Jeconiah's family is all killed, struck dead. And the Levites say, whoa, time out. The ark is still wielding some power here. We've been bad. All of us Israelites have been bad. God may still be mad at us. He's going to kill Jeconiah and his family for not partying. We've been doing worse than that. We need to get the ark out of here too before God kills us. So they send the ark up to, that is this name, ring a bell, Kiriath Jearim. It should. We've talked about the city of Kiriath Jearim. It is a Gibeonite city. Does anybody remember who the Gibeons were?
The dudes who sell the Bibles.
Well, no, those are Gideons. These are Gibeons.
I don't,
Okay, let me refresh your memory. The Israelites come into the promised land. They're wiping out all of these Canaanite tribes, one at a time. So this one group of people goes to Joshua, disguises themselves as like burdened travelers from a far land, even though they're just from the next town over. And they say, we're just travelers here. We've come from a long, long way, but we like this town that we're staying in. So could you leave us alone and we'll support you? And Joshua says, yes, we'll make a covenant with you without consulting with God. Does this ring a bell?
Mhm.
And he makes a covenant with the Gibeonites, and they get Gibeah, Kiriath Jearim, and they're the people they just made a deal with that have been living there forever. And Joshua says, all right, they're God-fearing. They've essentially converted, but they're not Jewish. We got to leave them alone. So what the Levites are doing is they're playing a very clever game here. They're saying, let's send the ark into neutral territory. That way, God won't be mad at them, and he won't be mad at us, and we're not giving it back to the Philistines. And so there is where the ark stays for 20 years in Kiriath Jearim, which is, just west of Jerusalem. Jerusalem at this point is still known as Jabus because the Jebusites are still in control there. So on the map, you see Kiriath Jearim there, which is where the ark is, and Jabus, which is Jerusalem. So the ark has finally made its way back into Judah. Go ahead, Jerry.
Jeff, all this transfer of the ark, and I remember the one Bible story about when the Jews were transferring it at one point and it started to fall, and two of the Levites reached up to steady it, and they were killed. They died. How could all this transfer happen without something like that going
They're
on?
allowed to touch the poles that go through the rings on the side of the ark, and that's the way they would have been carrying it.
So the Philistines would have honored that too, or known about
Or
it?
a whole bunch of them died, and that was part of the reason they wanted to get it the heck out of there.
But Jeff, they weren't transferring in the same method that it was being transferred years ago, though, right?
Well, they probably still have the coverings, and they still have the poles, and they're still trying to be careful and comply, but I'm sure they don't have the same carts and the same tents and so forth that they had in the desert, because those would have rotted by now.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So, all right. Ark is back, and suddenly we segue, and we're back to Samuel. The ark has been returned, and we hear in chapter 7 at the very beginning that Israel now returns to God. Okay, again, they've learned their lesson. They were screwing up. God let the ark be captured, and then he took out their enemies again with the ark. Now the ark's returned. They've learned their lesson. We got to get back to God. So Samuel now really is the dude. He's in charge. And so we see in chapter 7 that Samuel is now really functioning in a very unique way that we haven't seen for a long, long time. Chapter 7, we hear that he tells them, if you stay with God and avoid the Baals, the Astartes, fix your heart on the Lord, he will deliver you from the Philistines. That's a prophecy. Then he says, so they removed it all and served God, and Samuel then gave orders, gather everybody to Mitzvah, that I may pray to the Lord for you. He's offering prayers on behalf of the people. That's a priest, prophet, priest. And then it says at the end of chapter 7, verse 8, that it was at Mitzvah that Samuel then began to judge the Israelites, to lead them. Priest, prophet, king. The last time we heard all three put together was way back in the book of Genesis, when it was a guy that Jesus followed in the order of
Melchizedek. Melchizedek.
Melchizedek.
There you go. So Samuel is in the order of Melchizedek. Jesus was not a Levite. Samuel is not a Levite. This is a different order of priests. This is not a Levitical priesthood that is passed on by heredity. This is a priesthood of God himself chosen. You folks remember who we thought Melchizedek might have been? The son of Noah, handpicked by God. Remember that?
Shem?
Yes. There you go. So you see how this is starting to now all fit all the way back to Genesis. We now have this very, very, very special priest. And this gets back to Sue's point that Hannah is essential to the salvation story because Samuel is in the order of Melchizedek. It's from him that eventually Mary is going to be able to have Jesus. All right. So the Philistines haven't learned their lesson yet. They hear that everybody's gathered at Mizpah, so they attack again. And Samuel has prayed to the Lord, and the Lord thundered. And the Philistines were thrown into disarray. God defeated them, not the Israelites. Sound familiar? Joshua? And so then we hear that the enemies of Israel are subdued and peace prevails in the land. It's returned to the Lord. And now Samuel, we can get the other map up, Lou, starts functioning in his role as priest, prophet, and king around the entire area in the southern part of Ephraim, where all of these shrines are. So Mizpah, Gilgal, Shiloh, Bethel, and Ramah are the area. Well, he actually lives in Ramah. By the way, Ramah, this is just a bit of interesting trivia. You remember who took Jesus and laid him in the tomb?
Joseph of Araphat? No.
Yeah, say that again.
I said Joseph of Araphat.
Arimathea.
Arimathea, right.
Arimathea used to be known as Ramah. Samuel lives in Ramah. Joseph of Arimathea is Joseph of Ramah. Interesting trivia bit. So here's Samuel traveling around, being a judge, and apparently the entire land of Israel now recognizes Samuel as their judge, not just a regional judge. And they get anxious. And they say, we want a king. Samuel's sons are bad, like Eli's sons. And they say, we don't want them as our judge, so give us a king. And initially, Samuel's unhappy about that. King is bad. The Lord is your king. But the Lord says, what, Chris?
Let him have a king. He says a lot of things. He says, let him have a king. They're mad, or I'll use the word mad at me, God, not him, Samuel. The quote that I have is, for they have not rejected you, but they rejected me for being taken over by them. So God agrees that the people can have a king, but he tells Samuel to lay out all the things that are going to change as a result of this new kingship that they are so badly desiring. And they want this kingship so that they can be like all the other nations and have a king and be judged by that king. And I think that's probably one of the problems, that they want to be judged by and be like all the other nations and be judged by this king, because God is their king and their judge. And God has led them to victory in all these battles, and they just refuse to see it. And one of the things that I read that said that God had always planned to give them a king, the king of Jesus, just not on the timetable that the Israelites wanted. They wanted it now, and God was going to save it, Jesus for another time.
Exactly. So we have Samuel saying king bad, God saying king okay. And Samuel then saying, and then God saying, but tell them all the bad things that are going to happen with a king. This is prophecy. And Samuel lays out 8 bad things that are going to happen, king bad. And they say, we want the king anyway. So God gives them a king. Well, kind of. How does that come about, Chris?
So, so it comes about with, let me just change my notes here. So Saul, his father, Saul's family is probably a little bit well-to-do, and his family has some donkeys. These donkeys wander off, and Saul's father, Kish, asks Saul to go find the donkeys and take a servant with him to find these donkeys. They search for days, wandering through a bunch of different towns. I just lost it, sorry. Ephraim and Salasha and Shalom, and then Benjamin. And they can't find the donkeys. The servant that Saul took with him said, Saul wanted to go home. We've been out here. My father's going to get worried. We should go home. The servant says, you know what, why don't we go see the seer? And the seer was another name for, I guess, the prophet Samuel or prophets. And so Saul listened to his servant, agreed with his servant, because they actually go and they meet Samuel as I guess they met him at the gate as he was on his way to this the sacrifice of it. And then they go, and Saul and Samuel meet. Samuel tells Saul the donkeys are fine, and that God has called him to be the king of Israel. And he says that by saying, whom shall Israel want, if not you and your father's family? Saul's clearly surprised by this. I think clearly surprised.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And he says, wait a minute. I'm like from the lowest of the clans, the smallest and lowest of the clans in Benjamin. And but he agrees to the plan, to God's plan. And that was the important thing too, is that the Israelites wanted a king, and God chose the king, which was an important piece of this. And when I was looking at this, one of the things that I thought was interesting is Saul had 3 opportunities to kind of say no and not get to where he was. When his father asked him to go find the donkeys, he certainly could have said no. Could have said, I want to take a friend, not a servant. I want this servant, not that servant. And he went with it. He said, okay. And then after searching for a few days, he presented with another decision. Do I go talk to this priest, or do I go back and see my father like I want to do? Or not the priest, but Samuel. And he listened to the servant, and he went. And then again, Samuel says, gave him the message from God, and he accepted that too. So I think when I was reading this, I was just thinking about how many times do we lose a donkey and get discouraged and get away from God and really just not stay the course, and as a result, don't go closer to God, but go farther away.
Perfect. Really good. Thank you, Chris. So yeah, I think it's important to point out that there were a lot of seemingly random coincidences here that put Saul and Samuel together. The donkeys go away. They go looking for him. They can't find him. He's got the servant with him who knows about Samuel. They go to look for Samuel in the city. They have no idea where he is. And they meet these girls who say, I'll go over that way. and they catch him just as they're going one way through the gate and he's going the other way, clearly showing God's hand at work here. So God chooses Saul, king good. So Samuel anoints him privately, anoints him. Samuel, priest, prophet, and king, anoints Saul, not king, but judge, anoints Saul, welcomes him in to the kingdom to the family of leadership, blesses him, tells him he's going to have a ecstasy of the Spirit, gives him the gifts of the Spirit in the anointing, and makes him a member of the class of leaders, of kings, welcomes him into the family of leadership, baptism, by anointing him, anoints him with the power of the Holy Spirit, confirmation, makes him the leader of the people, ordains him as king. So now Samuel tells Saul, now you're going to have a bunch of signs that are going to confirm this for you. Go into this town and all this stuff is going to happen, and then wait there for me for 7 days. So Saul goes into the town, and that day, all the signs are fulfilled. He has the ecstasy of the Holy Spirit, and then it says that day he went home. He didn't wait for Samuel. He didn't wait the 7 days he was told to wait. Make a mental note of that. That is very important. He did not wait the 7 days. He didn't follow Samuel's instructions. So Samuel says, okay, I'm not going to let him weasel out. I'm the dude. I get the rule. I'm calling all of the tribes together to Mitzvah for a big to get together. And we're going to figure this king thing out. So let's draw lots. First, which tribe? Benjamin. Tribe of Benjamin. The least of the tribe. There's only a few of them left. They've been pretty much wiped out. Clan of whatever. The least of the clan of the Benjamites. Saul. Come on up here, buddy. So again, just as Sue said, God is choosing from the lowest of the low. The tribe of Benjamin, the lowest clan of the tribe of Benjamin. Then Saul is picked publicly as king. It says that, hang on. So then Samuel reiterates to the people, today you have rejected God by making me give you a king, king bad. But he's doing it because you want it. So this is the one he's chosen, king good. The Lord chose him, 10:24. And then at the very end of chapter 10, it says that this Saul from the tribe of Benjamin, who has now been made king of all of Israel, in Mitzvah, which is in Ephraim, is rejected by some of these worthless people, Ephraimites, no doubt, who think a lot of themselves. You remember who was always causing trouble in the book of Judges when one of the judges who wasn't an Ephraimite would do something? And the Ephraimites would come and say, we're going to beat you up and have war on you because you didn't go to us first. Because the Ephraimites think a lot of themselves. All the temples are there. All the shrines are there in Ephraim, Mitzvah, Shiloh, Bethel, Gilgal. And they think that there's something special. And they don't like it that this Benjamite has been made king. And that's where we leave for today. Any questions?
Yeah,
Hey, Jeff.
just a comment. He didn't follow directions in waiting the 7 days. Could that be how we males get and we do things without reading the directions? We just jump into it?
Could be, but remember what happens when people don't follow God's directions in the Old Testament.
I know. So if I had had a question, my question was going to be over something that just bubbled up inside of me, and I laughed. I can't tell you how many times I laughed. And you glazed right over it, it was hemorrhoids. Okay. How God comes down and everybody in the city is coming down with hemorrhoids. I just, and then that wasn't funny. I mean, I laughed kind of. And then to go to the blacksmith or the smithy and say, I need 5 golden hemorrhoids. Like, I just took a fit of laughing and laughed so hard. I mean, the smithy says, well, I need a model.
Bend over, I want to look.
Yeah, who's going to do that? You know, I just took a fit of laughing, you know, how despicable obviously that was. And that's what God was doing, was making it as bad as it can be.
Well, and you do need to know, though, John, that that's a translation issue. And one of the translations that some of the Bibles give there is hemorrhoids.
Boils.
Another is boils.
Yeah, I know.
Another is tumors.
Yeah.
So, you know, I didn't glaze over it. It's just, you know, depending upon your translation, it says different things.
Well, fortunately,
Depending on what
I've never been-
problems you have, you think about it, you know, and put it in your own words.
Yeah.
I feel blessed I've never been afflicted with the boils or the
It gives new meaning to the flaming wrath of God.
I didn't want to go there.
Interesting, the
One
whole
sick puppy.
story. Whoops.
That's it.
Interesting, the whole story of Eli. You know, when we get our little readings in the Catholic liturgy, you really only hear Eli referred when he's got this call. So you think he must be some great priest that was there. Turns out he was a bit of a bum. But I wonder if he was one of these typical males who gave his all to his career and neglected his family. And that's why his sons went astray, because I'm a priest and I'm a priest and I'm a priest.
Well,
Entitlement.
Yeah.
you know, human nature doesn't change that much, even, you know, in 500 BC. And as we talked about last night, Mark, I mean, these were just bad people. So every generation goes through its bad people, right? And bad times. Anyway.
I thought it was interesting.
Samuel.
Yes, but then you don't hear any more about them. Question, maybe I guess you referred to, you'll do this later, but the Levites are no longer going to
At
be the
Shiloh.
priests, the priestly. Yeah.
At
Is this at
Shiloh, at Shiloh, which is the main.
I have probably Googled, you know, 15 things, right? And what I'm trying to figure out is I'm not coming across Catholic interpretations. Like, you know, one of the things that I was looking at after the fact that I read, I'm like, let me see what this is. And it was, you know, some Christian guy. So still on the right side of things. It wasn't Muslim or something, I suppose. But how do you know if you're getting the right Catholic interpretation? Like last week I was using some Jewish resources, which I felt like would know the Old Testament pretty well.
We talked about that during the first 6 weeks, that with the Old Testament, often the Jewish sources, the Talmud and so forth, are not bad sources to go to. Just recognize that they don't see the fulfillment of that in the New Testament.
Right.
Some of the non-Catholic sources are okay for some stuff, but to know there's really only one decent Catholic source that's online, and that's the Haydock commentary.
I can't find that.
You know, just Google Haydock Catholic commentary, and it's actually, the site puts it parallel to a bunch of other Christian commentaries, and you can compare Haydock to Haydock.
Haydock. Okay.
Well, there's a lot of stuff there. You're right. Yeah. Okay.
And you just got to make sure you're looking at the Haydock commentary instead of one of the other Christian ones that, you know, you go to a specific Bible place, a verse, and it will give you 6 or 7 commentaries in a row on that and who it's by. and you just got to find the Haydock one. That doesn't mean the other ones are bad. Often they're very good too, as long as they don't disagree with Haydock.
Right.
You listening,
Okay.
John? Because I expect you to jump up and do this in a couple weeks.
Good morning.
Jerry.
John delegates to Jerry.
All right, so Chris is going to be doing it in 2 weeks. Everybody else think about whether you want to jump in 3 weeks. So you don't need an answer now, but think about that. All right, for next week, Joe and Sue are going to be facilitating the discussion on chapters 11 through 20.
Right.
Does Joe have to be involved?
No, I don't. If you want to do it yourself.
Yes, he does.
See? Can't separate us,
I
can
love you,
John?
brother. I love you.
One flesh, one flesh.
There you go. So, Jeff, I think we now, knowing that how it's doing, that we weren't doing it, we would like everyone to, let's continue the same thing. Prepare a question from verses 11 through 20, okay? But prepare the answer as well.
Oh,
And have it to Lou by Monday, 5 p.m. sharp.
You don't want the answers to Lou, just the questions.
No, you want the questions and your answers like Mark Prival's been doing. Yeah, that's what we're doing.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
we do. We need that.
Jeff, I was looking at the Haydock commentary and I don't see anything in there about Samuel. 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, they jump from.
Well, you know, Samuel was one book at one time.
Samuel and Kings actually were all 4 books were one book at one time.
So maybe that's what it is because they have a 1 King, 2 Kings, 3 King, and 4 King. So maybe it's in there.
That's exactly what it is. 1 Kings and 2 Kings and Haydock is actually 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel. 3 Kings and 4 Kings and Haydock is actually 1 Kings and 2 Kings.
Okay.
Yeah, and I should have explained that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, kept that secret.
5 p.m. sharp. Which day, Joe?
Monday. No, you can have to the end. Lou, tell me when you need. Can